Sorry, I'm late.
Hey, everybody. So if you are looking for the meetup discussion on events and on the future of conferences and events, you're in the right place. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. I know there's always a lot that you could be doing right now, so we're very grateful that you've chosen to spend your time with us. And we certainly intend to make it worth your while. So we have a great discussion on deck, some fantastic panelists. Before we get into that, I want to briefly introduce myself and the meetup, and then we will get right into the panel. So I am JJ Colao. I currently run a PR firm called Haymaker Group here in New York. We work with tech companies, some of which you know, probably those like Etsy, HubSpot, ZocDoc, Angie, and many others. The only plug I will make during this entire hour is we're a team of 15, and we're always looking to speak with great PR folks. So if you're ever curious about joining us, please visit our website, shoot me an email. In terms of this meetup, so we've done about 22 of these in the past. And if you're not familiar, if you're a first-time meetup attendee, what we like to do is get together a group of journalists, editors, executives, the folks, you know, in this instance, who run the events for media organizations every quarter or so to talk about some issue relating to the craft or the business of media. And so we will have a number of these going forward. So if you get some value out of this, hopefully you will enjoy our subsequent panels as well. But all of that aside, want to get right into the panel. So as I mentioned, we have some really, really great people joining us this evening who run literally the most important, influential business conferences in the world, certainly in the media world. So just to kick things off, Kim Last, who, you know, I'm not sure what kind of screen view everybody has, but Kim has the very cool background, very colorful background. And she is the editor of live journalism and special content at the Wall Street Journal. We also have Marlene Saritzky, who is joining us. She is the founder of MSS Associates and also the program director at Fortune Brainstorm Tech. We have two folks from FT, which is fantastic. So first we have Jennifer Ablan, who is the US Assistant Managing Editor at the Financial Times, and then Claire Arpa, who is the head of FT Live for the Americas. So thank you all very, very much for joining us this evening. I know there are always tons and tons of events that you all have to organize. So hopefully it was nice being a participant rather than, you know, sort of a producer in this instance. But just to kick things off and give folks a little bit of context, would love to start by hearing what your sort of calendar looks like and, you know, basically the cadence of events that your organizations are putting together and what kind of defines your year when you're busiest, what's most important, what's happening, you know, in between the busy times, that sort of thing. And then we can sort of go from there. So maybe Kim, we can start with you and then go to some of the other folks if that
works. Me first.
Yep.
Well, the Wall Street Journal's live journalism portfolio is rather expansive. It includes everything from our annual CEO Council to the Future of Everything Festival, WSJ Tech Live, and a grouping of industry forums. Another thing that has really risen out of the pandemic that also sits under our portfolio is something that we call our live Q&As, which are news reactive, analysis driven, and really, really quick to organize live events for our readers and subscribers. So when you add all of that up across the year, actually just did this count recently for our editor-in-chief, Matt Murray, we clocked in at 99 events in the calendar year this last year. So that's including about 40 of those live Q&As, and then the rest sort of hit across those other franchises that I just talked about.
So that's essentially every 3 or 4 days, there's a Wall Street Journal event.
Yes, so if you look at a week, depending on the week, it could be anywhere between 2 and 4 events per week in this sort of virtual hybrid new model that we're working in.
That is quite a lot. And I think more than most people would have expected, myself included.
Yeah.
Claire, how about the FT?
Yeah, so not to traumatize everyone in terms of numbers, but basically, obviously, with the FT, we're kind of coming at it from like a very global perspective, and I think I'd like to put in a caveat that, you know, turning into digital meant that we could offer a lot more maybe roundtables and webinars than we normally would have been able to do in person, if you get. So we had in 2021 over 340 events. And that basically was divided up as about 60 core events, which we would call our multi-sponsored events, such as like the Global Banking Summit or the Energy Source Live event. So that range from across varied industries and themes. But then we had also like 99 webinars and over 100 roundtables. So you can imagine how kind of stretched our teams were. Having said that, it was a highly successful year in terms of revenue because of the fact that we saved a lot of costs by not having a lot of venues to kind of pay for. But obviously that's going to be kind of an assumption for us to worry about this year in 2022 as we go into hybrid. What do these costs mean? But yeah, you know, so far we're planning up to about 46 core events this year. We have about 11 of those are US centric. And then with the partnering events that we do, we have a very solid kind of calendar planned at the moment, and I'm sure it will continue to expand as we go forward.
Wow. So again, events coming at you pretty much every day. Marlene, I know you work on Fortune Brainstorm Tech primarily, obviously working on a ton of other events during the course of the year, but I would love to hear about, in your case, what the schedule for even just putting together that event looks like, because there's a lot that goes into it throughout the year. But I'm sure that, you know, that your bandwidth ramps up and down according to whatever week, month it might be.
Yeah, and I can also speak to sort of Fortune's overall event business a little bit. I think right on par with the Wall Street Journal, Fortune did over 100 events in 2021. Most of the sort of signature events are Fortune Brainstorm Health, Fortune Brainstorm Tech, Fortune Global Forum, an AI conference, Global Sustainability, and then the Most Powerful Women and Most Powerful Women Next Gen. Those are the big in-person franchises, and each of those events has a number of what we call walk-up or walk-out events, a couple of smaller events. Typically, you know, before COVID, there was always, you know, there might be a dinner in San Francisco or a dinner in Chicago or a dinner in New York. So some smaller events. And then this year, all those walk-ups and walk-outs or last year, were virtual. So because many of the conferences run on what's like a membership model, like you become a member of Fortune Brainstorm Tech, and that allows you to come to all different kinds of events, including the actual event in Aspen in July. And then there are some other series on the future of work. We have something called the CFO Collaborative. So I think, like the Wall Street Journal, we're all, the calendar is chasing us pretty much all the time. Yeah, so, but I'm the program director specifically for Fortune Brainstorm Tech, which takes a good 7 or 8 months to put together. We did go in person in 2021 and met in a different location December 1st and had a wonderful time, and everybody stayed safe and healthy. And I just had to turn around, and now I'm in the middle of programming it for July, where we're going to return to Aspen.
Great. So this brings me to my next question, which you all have alluded to a bit, but it sounds pretty clear from what you all said that not all of these events are the same in terms of their format. So Kim, you mentioned these sort of rapid response events that you put together when I assume there's a news story that folks want to hear a little bit more about, or that
Give you an
reporters can maybe
example.
dish on.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. We had one today on the escalation in Ukraine, and it coincided with a great explainer that we've published about what is going on in Ukraine right now, right? So really mapping those two pieces of news coverage together.
And Kim, if I can ask, am I allowed to ask
Certainly.
other panelists questions? Kim, so are those like, do you get a day's notice for those, and you just blast? Do you get it blasted to all of your subscribers? How does that invitation?
Yeah, so the way it works is sometimes they come together as fast as 12 hours.
Wow.
And it's kind of like it's a blend of
a flash mob.
Yeah, well, kind of, but it's like it's kind of like the model of talking heads, except on cable TV, except it's with our journalists, our editors and reporters who are on the ground, especially if we can get a reporter on the ground. And then we're leveraging the journal platform with push notifications, with email notifications. Gosh, if I have a 2-day runway, it's awesome, because then I could get it plugged in our 10-point and on Notes on the News and in the Capital Journal and all of the sort of like key newsletters of the journals. So, in a perfect world, we have 48 hours, but sometimes, it's news. We move faster.
It's really interesting.
How many people would typically join that kind of event as attendees?
Well, and I'm sure just like the ladies on the line here, we've seen just great numbers and engagement with everything that we've done in the pandemic, right? I think the real silver lining here is what used to be a ballroom that had about 200, 300 people in the room, where, 10xing that to 2,000, 3,000. And in the case of like our Future of Everything Festival, for example, like 4,000 in person, 50,000 online watching, right? So, there's been a real silver lining around the virtual digital component here. So to your question on the live Q&As, I mean, we get anywhere from, if it's a real sort of like journal topic where there's sort of magic in the air around it. When we covered the meme stock mania, I mean, we were getting 30,000 people, 40,000 people watching, up to, Ukraine Today, which I think like performed rather well when we're global, but we're not known for necessarily global news. That was, we were clicking into the thousands there. So, it's a sliding scale, I'd say.
Yeah. And I would second that as well. Like, it's like I found, like, for us, it opened our eyes to the, how even people from other regions get excited about content that we don't necessarily think maybe they might be that keen on, So for example, we had our weekend festival in London. It had been happening for like regularly every year. And as soon as obviously the pandemic hit, we had to go digital. And we saw that basically our US readership, there was like 3,000% interest in like digitally watching the festival. And we were like, oh my God, as a result, we must bring this to the US. So we have plans in this year to do it in DC, right? So it just opens up new areas of opportunity that you didn't even think about before.
We're jumping ahead of where I planned to go, but this is great because you're all alluding to this fact. Well, let me put this out there first, and you can tell me if it's true. It sounds to me like the pandemic and everything that you've discovered in terms of the demand that is latent for all these events by putting them out digitally has been positive in terms of the business of events. Is that correct? And if so, I would love to hear a little bit more about how that has sort of fueled the expansion of this line of business for your respective organizations. Claire, maybe we just stick with you for this one.
Okay.
And then we can go around.
Thank you. So I would say definitely for us, definitely a positive experience. And I'll be honest, I've been, not to show my age, but I've been in events for like over 20 years. And, when people would come to me, oh, we can do webinars for you, I'd be like, webinars, like that kind of thing. And it's like, but obviously these last 3 years, it has really transformed the industry, I think. And like I said, as soon as this thing happened, we quickly pivoted to digital. I won't say it was easy. There were a lot of tears and like trying to figure out platforms, how to do it well, how to engage with your audiences, and how to push out the content in a nice way that kind of, you know, puts you in a good light, basically. Like we said, being digital, you are able to be more agile very quickly. You know, we had the same thing with the Afghanistan situation happened with Biden. Within a day, we had kind of put together a nice panel. We attracted 3,000 people because they were really interested in what's happening. You can move very, very quickly and attract a really huge audience very quickly as a result. You save on costs, like I said, and you attract a really amazing global audience that get to know you and what you can offer to them very quickly. I think the disadvantage maybe as we go into this year is maybe people are tired. Maybe, you know, you have to be very selective in terms of what content you make digital versus in person, and how to mix and match just to keep people engaged. And I think that's going to be the concern for us is how to make sure not that we do everything live streamed and everything in person so that it's like a free for all, but it's like how to be selective so that the content we push out makes sense and is of interest to the right people, basically.
I have two quick follow-up questions, and feel free to answer however you would like. I'm no longer a reporter, so whatever you're willing to share is great. But are you able to maybe say what the typical year of attendees at FT events looked like in 2019 versus today, and how that's increased, and also any other indicators of how the scale of that operation has grown in terms of the folks on your team or anything else that might be relevant?
Well, I think there, you know, we have seen huge growth in the data that we have been able to collate, because obviously, as you can imagine, with these thousands and thousands of people watching, it's just like you're engaging with a brand new audience. So if you can, it's like Kim said, you know, in the good old days of in person, you'd get anything between maybe 100 and 200 people coming into the event. You know, they would be your stable kind of delegate kind of audience that would be very loyal and attend year in, year out. As we've moved in, you know, we pivoted very quickly to launch our global boardroom event. It attracted like 50,000 at the time because it was the people were just like really uncertain about what the world would attract, you know, what would happen. So obviously, we've seen those numbers drop gradually because it's like, you know, now more people are doing digital and they're doing it very well. And they're more distracted by more in-person activities. But still, like I said, the numbers still remain quite stable. You know, you can get anything between 500 to 3,000 people watching a certain topic, depending on how broad or how strategic it is. And we continue to gather more data as we go along, because it's obviously they're giving us permission to, you know, share trials for subscribers or different kind of content initiatives. And I think they just, you know, people appreciate that. And I think it helps to keep the numbers engaged.
Great. Marlene, how about you? Is it fair to say that this has been a tailwind, at least in terms of the business side?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's just opened up. I mean, we, the collective we of privileged working professionals, never in a million years thought that businesses could run with everybody at home. It just never even occurred to us. You know, there was telecommuting and it was like for a few hours a week, maybe. So I think just it opened everybody's mind for what the possibilities are. And I think balancing that with, I mean, I think the Fortune conferences for a lot of people, like there for both the colleagues on the call, is that there are some people that it is one of the things they do every year, and they see the right people and they know whether or not they can make a deal there or not, or they go for all kinds of reasons. And for Fortune Brainstorm Tech, it's not easy to get to Aspen. Like if you want to go to that conference in Aspen, you got to go to Aspen. You know, there's very few direct flights and you can't,
Right.
you know, so it's
Transfer in Denver. Yeah.
Right. So it's, I think that the live events, I think, you know, as much as going out to dinner has become a new luxury again, meeting some friends at a restaurant, I think going to conferences and events will always be a really special experience. And you can do all kinds of virtual things with small groups, large groups, varying time zones, doing them all over the world, doing them like Kim does, you know, at the drop of a hat. I'm sorry to say that you get stuck with those sometimes, but I just think it has had such an impact on how everybody does their jobs that it would be silly for those of us in this business not to take advantage of what's available now.
I do want to get into how those different formats push or shape, I guess, the format of the events themselves, or the content of the events themselves. So meaning, I would imagine that there are certain ways that the live experience impacts how you think about a certain event, and what it should look like in terms of the speakers, in terms of whether it's a panelist discussion or a fireside chat or whatever it might be. And I would love to hear about how you all think about that, and what works well virtually versus what needs to be done in person or in some sort of hybrid form. Because that's kind of a new skill, I would imagine, that's had to be developed over the last 2 or so years. So Kim, would love to go to you there, and then Jennifer, I promise we will get you involved.
Okay. You know, as you were talking, as you were saying the question, I was racking my brain for examples of this, because I think our guiding light here always is newsmaker first for the most part. So I'll give you the example. If we can get Elon Musk, whether he is Zooming in or if he wants to come in person, we're rolling with that one way or another. So, you know, that's sort of the guiding light here. Now, of course, you know, I think, you know, we've sort of scratched at this a bit. The tricky part is, how do you balance this sort of hybrid existence, right? I think the challenge for all of us, first, I think the opportunity from the pandemic was not only were we getting these great large digital audiences, but it was also really a lot easier in some ways to get very high profile people to say yes to you. You know, people who you were chasing for years and years to join you were finally like, oh yeah, I've got the time. Oh, I could hop on Zoom and do that. So that was happening. And so I think the challenge now, as we figure out this sort of hybrid puzzle, is how do we get people to come to where we are hosting something? New York, London, Los Angeles, right? Like where and how should we sort of put down our flagpole, right? And try to get people there. And then I think it's also the balance of, okay, how do you, even if you were beaming in, you know, an Elon Musk. And by the way, I should say, before the pandemic, I used to eye roll at that stuff. I used to say, right, no way are we agreeing to someone just like Zooming. Everyone's laughing here as I'm saying this, right? Because you were probably thinking the same thing too, right? I was always just like, no way are we doing that. You're here or you're not, and we'll play long game on this. So I think, you know, I think the challenge now is, okay, we're probably going to agree to that. And how do we figure out ways to make it engaging for the audience that is physically in person with you? How do we make it engaging for those who are watching online? And then how do we get very clever with the formatting of the conversation? So, you know, to your point, JJ, on formats, we have gotten more and more strategic about how we structure our interviews now. We're putting in probably more time than ever before around prepping our journalists ahead of a main conversation when we're anticipating news. We're just getting better and better at that. I think, you know, I didn't grow up I had one job in television in my media career, and I have to tell you, I am reflecting more and more from that time in TV than probably my other stops working in magazines and in print journalism now.
That's a great point, and that's a great segue to get Jennifer involved. And for the audience, I realize I didn't go through this earlier, but the distinction between Jennifer and Claire is really running the event side of the FT. Jennifer is very involved, but is also primarily a journalist, an editor, a reporter. So to set up this question, Jennifer, I would love to hear about how you interact with events, because what always struck me as a reporter is that I was expected to do all of these different things, including go on stage and moderate panels and, you know, be a public speaker in addition to writing and editing and sourcing and all of that. And they are very different skill sets.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would love to just hear.
Yeah, I love the question that you posed to Kim, because I think we've seen several situations where you get on a Zoom and there's a panel discussion and they end up talking over each other inadvertently. And I've seen this also on TV where someone's beaming in and there's one person live in the studio and they're accidentally tripping over each other's words. And it just makes for a really technically, logistically hysterical process. And I'm sure, I mean, everyone's smiling here because we've seen it and anything can happen on a Zoom. So, you know, one of the things that I just wanted to say is, I think, especially with Zoom exhaustion really hitting a lot of us 2 years into the pandemic, I think people are really dying for live events. As Claire noted, we're going to have our first live event, in-person event in May, which is going to be held in DC. And I think it's going to be a really huge hit. One of the things that I discovered last year, and you know, because we've all been relegated to our homes, is that there's an appetite for great content. People didn't stop reading, listening, Zooming to great content, and we've been huge beneficiaries of that. In terms of the structure of a discussion, I've anchored several FT Live events, and the best format, I think, is the one-on-one interviews. The panels are absolutely wonderful and valuable, but there's a lot of room for technical, logistical mishaps. I saw a mishap happened on an event that I was watching 2 weeks ago where someone beamed in a little too late and they had to be cut off, and that whole situation had to be resolved on Zoom. So these are just very awkward situations that I think a lot of us have had to face. Now, in terms of in-person events, I think once we get out of this crisis, I really believe it's actually going to be even more popular, given the fact that there's so much pent-up demand. And again, as I've said, people are just dying to get out of their houses.
That's interesting. Kim, were you going to chime in?
Just jump in on the panel piece, because what we found, especially rehearsals really matter for virtual.
Yeah.
Probably more than anything you would have done in person, right? And rehearsals matter for, you know, the journalist who is hosting the discussion, the guest, especially when you hit that weird hybrid type of model, right? And making sure also, like, the journalist knows to look into the right camera, for example. You know, like, very simple. I mean, it sounds so simplistic, but it makes such a huge difference in terms of coverage and content that come out of the event, right? But, you know, it's just another layer and level of preparation, right? And it's beyond just writing your questions or writing your script, but it's actually putting in the work in order to be able to deliver in this new kind of format and new kind of medium, right? Like, this is still, even though it's 2 years in and we're all kind of living in it, it's still kind of new. You know, we've had some success with a town hall model where it is very, it is rehearsed. We really work with each speaker ahead of going live around making sure they kind of know who's going to be thrown to first. We sort of set up guardrails with everybody ahead of time that you're going to get interrupted probably by one of our journalists, and that's okay. Just stop talking. We're going to guide you through this. We've also done this with debates where literally, you know, in the Zoom box while you're logged on, you see the countdown clock in front of you, and you know then we're like, your mic is killed and we're moving on. Like we have found, you know, the team that I work with, I sit on the newsroom side and I handle coverage and content and the agenda and program, but we have a whole team that we partner up with to produce all of this. And they've been really sort of like the wizard behind the screen with really helping us figure all this out from an execution standpoint.
That's really interesting. So you have all of these tactics, all of these means of kind of orchestrating the discussion so that nobody gets too off the rails in terms of steamrolling other speakers, you know, going deep into monologues, asking questions that are too long-winded, that sort of thing that you figured out over the course of the last, you know, 18 months, 24 months?
Yeah, and I'd say it's some stuff we've probably picked up over time too, having done this, right? But I'd say, you know, yeah, that's, I mean, JJ, whenever, you know, we talk about one of your companies coming on board for a journal event, we always talk about making news and not necessarily talking about talking points, right? So it's like, it's kind of that sort of framing, if you will, around participation.
Claire, I'm sorry to have cut you off.
No,
I know
sorry.
you wanted to get in here.
I know. I was going to say, I agree with Kim. I think one of the most important things we have found is, you know, finding really good third parties to work with, because it's like, it's not even just your internal team, your internal delivery team, but it's also production teams that have to be like on the same par as you in terms of how you work together. You have to build a level of trust, because obviously there's a lot of stress on the day, and some elements are like really out of your own control, like speakers like Wi-Fi or things like that. So what we have found to do these well is like really brief everyone within an inch of their life, and then do a lot of briefing calls, do a lot of like catch-ups between speakers, because what you don't want is really nervous speakers on the day. Now, to be honest with you, after 2 years, I think the speakers are quite professional at all this now. But when this first happened, everyone was a bit nervous, and I just think that by providing over information, everyone is a lot calmer and a lot more, you know, graceful when things don't go right, basically.
Right. They feel like they're in good hands, good, capable
Exactly.
hands. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Because we've started to get into the world of editorial, of reporting, and, you know, and moving beyond sort of the operation of these events of the business, I would love to hear about how your editorial teams interact with everything that you do, because you are news organizations, and the folks who are covering Ukraine or covering, you know, the stock market are parts of these events. And as we discussed, it's not generally what they signed up for. You know, I don't know how much they teach in terms of these kinds of skills at Columbia or Northwestern or whatever, but I don't think it's that much. So I would love to hear just what kind of role they play in terms of shaping these events, and you know, generally how they feel about participating in them and that sort of thing. Marlene, we haven't gone to you in a while, so it'd be great to start with you for this one, if that's okay.
Sure. I mean, for me at Fortune, it's like the best part of the job is working with the journalists. So we have a number of co-chairs, they're reporters or editors at Fortune who dedicate a part of their time. You know, I have like 4 co-chairs for Fortune, and that's the editorial team. So we're meeting all the time, trading ideas. Should we have this person? Should we have that person? You know, and so it's totally editorial driven on that way. And it's, like I said, it's the best part of the experience for me, because I get to work with them so closely. And then we're able to, you know, if we want to address a subject that maybe one of the co-chairs doesn't have an expertise in, I can, you know, if I have a question about crypto, I can call the crypto reporter, I can call the health reporter, I can reach out to anybody at Fortune. And because pretty much everybody at a certain level is the co-chair of something, because there are so many events, it really is part of the job. And it's also fun to bring in the newer people and invite them to moderate a session or to cover a session. I'm always looking like, well, maybe that person could be, that would be a great co-chair for another thing or for another year. So totally editorial driven, and I'm shepherd as much as anything else.
Very helpful. Jennifer, how much of your time is spent with events, and what does that time look like?
So I meet with Claire once a week. It's a very tight-knit newsroom. And as we've discovered, storytelling takes in different forms. It doesn't have to just be print. It can be audio. It can be FT Live. It could be on social media apps like Twitter, LinkedIn. So Claire and we confer every week, and I kind of sit in the newsroom where I could hear what people are working on. And, if there's, for instance, we had the banking summit. One of the things that we wanted to accomplish is what was happening with the return to work. What was happening with traders? Are they going back to the floor? And we had David Solomon, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, interviewed by our banking editor, Josh Franklin. And I have to say that the FT Live interview was very synergistic, because we walked away from that interview finding out that David Solomon, and I don't want to misquote him, he had said that he warned New York City's leaders that they cannot take its position as a global business destination for granted. And that came out from a one-on-one interview, and we produced a story on it, which went viral. So that's a concrete example of how our newsroom works. Claire, did you want to chime in here?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of say, I think we have really made a lot of efforts to obviously be wholly integrated, so that, all our core flagship events, they're very much have a chair, as Marlene, similar model to Marlene. We work very closely with Jennifer just to make sure our up and coming journalists are given a podium as well, so that they get the exposure that they deserve. All our events are more or less moderated by our global editorial teams. We just want to make sure we have the expertise on board. And I just think it's just as we have progressed forward, and thanks to in part as well to digital, we just make sure any content that is derived either through events or podcasts or like print kind of goes round and round, so that the story continues rather than just being held in a silo. So.
Great. Kim, is there anything that you wanted to add to this question? There's no pressure either way.
We're structured a little bit differently. So my whole team sits in the newsroom. I have a team of 6 editors who essentially, I guess, would, to lift some of the terminology from others here, essentially co-chair or run the agenda, content, programming, and the news coverage out of each one of our sort of flagship events. And just a quick plug, I am hiring some new editors. So if anybody's interested, please get in touch.
Plug away.
But I'd say, their job, each of those editors' job is not just working very collaboratively with the business side, meaning our head of production. There's usually a programming manager who handles a lot of the logistics for our events. Also some of the questions that the marketing team may have around how to market the event. They're fielding all of that, but then they're also really looking across the newsroom and mapping out, okay, what topics do we want to hear? Which journalists should participate? What features or what stories do we have coming down the line where there may be some synergies in terms of featuring a source on stage? All of that is really shepherded out of the newsroom and out of my team. And I'd say, the win, to Jennifer's point, is when you have that interview with the newsmaker and that news goes everywhere. right? And it truly goes viral. It gets picked up on CNBC. It's going crazy on Twitter. It's getting, everybody else is writing about your event as it happens. Like that's when you kind of hit that spark in that moment. And that's, I very much view that as the role and responsibility of the live journalism team in our newsroom. That's great. And just a quick interlude for the audience before we get into the next question. So there's a great question via the Q&A button, at the bottom of your screen, and we will certainly get to that. But if folks in the audience have any other questions that they want to make sure the panelists address, just go ahead and type them into that Q&A section, and we'll make sure that we get to them in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so. Before we do that, though, the other question that I had is, what are you looking to give the audience when you put these events together? So we've talked about breaking news. It seems like that is probably a given, that you want to break news and kind of have that moment where the rest of the world is talking about the conversation that was had at your event. Is everything geared around that, or are there other goals that you would like to accomplish in terms of, I don't know, providing insights, context, whatever it might be? I would just be curious to hear how you all think about that kind of overarching goal for some of these events. And Marlene, if you don't mind, maybe we can start with you for this one.
Sure. I think I always like to, when I'm talking to reps for speakers, I try to say something along the lines of, we're interested in putting people on stage, not because of what they know, but because of how they think. I don't need to learn about Walmart or Ripple or Coinbase by listening to the CEO. Somebody else mentioned talking points. We want to know how they think and what are they thinking about the future. That the conversation that you might have, that you might have with them privately, and finding out that stuff is of course much more interesting than hearing an update on the company. And sometimes that is a struggle with the PR people, because their job is to keep to the talking points. And we try to under rehearse, because we find that sometimes over rehearsing can thwart a really good conversation, a surprising question, a surprising answer. So I think those are the kinds of things that we're looking for. And when we do one-on-ones, it's one thing. When we do a panel with 2 or 3, which is as many as we would do, we really, try and sometimes match iconoclasts together. Do you want 3 people from a cryptocurrency company together? You might. It could be really interesting, but it could be just as interesting to have somebody from a traditional banking experience who's going to create some friction. I mean, it's like a good story. If there's no tension, then it's not a good story. So I think that's the challenge, but that's, I think, what makes people go, oh, that was a really interesting interview.
Those are great distinctions. So I love the point about wanting to understand how people think rather than what they know. So basically getting a sense of their worldview and having them sort of walk through how they get to certain conclusions, in response to different questions. And that point of tension is a great one as well. So, getting a couple of people on stage where the audience knows this is going to be fun, because those people, I won't say hate each other, but, they obviously have conflicting points of view about the given topic. Claire, is that in line with how the FT thinks about it? Or I'd love to hear what your approach is to all of this.
Yeah, I would say like our priority is definitely convening kind of different kind of perspectives, just to make sure that there's like a sharing of intelligence and ideas, and trying to figure out pain points in the industry or a theme, and kind of what to expect next in your thought leadership. So like I still get excited after all these years about the ability of conferences to just bring really exciting and different perspectives together. I think what I would say is a priority for us, and is something that we've been working on very proactively for the past 2 years, is ensuring that there is a diversity as well, because I think that has been really important. And Jennifer is like one of our key kind of pioneers in this, you know, like she really pushes us to kind of really get really exciting perspectives. And yeah, I think always the ability to bring really different thinking hats on and into an event, it just really makes it exciting. And the more differing the opinion, the more exciting and hilarious certain kind of discussions can be.
You know, I would just to jump in on this, I also think, you know, we scratched at this a little bit, but certain events have a real community power to them. So I think about, when I think about that, at least at the Wall Street Journal, it's our CEO Council and sort of the year-long curriculum there. It's our CFO and CIO and CMO networks, where there's really a professional sort of knitting, if you will, against the members who are there, and also the types of programs that are being built to really meet those members where they are. You know, in the pandemic, you know, not everything we do is newsmaker driven. We launched a job summit for job seekers, which at the time when we launched the event, it was the most attended Wall Street Journal event at that time. We had nearly 10,000 job seekers logged on, and this was at the peak of the pandemic, where, you know, layoffs were a real thing. And in terms of our audience, you know, we had folks who were sort of like on the eve of their retirement with the rug sort of pulled under them and looking to try to navigate what the next step for them could be. And that's what this event sort of aimed to serve, at least as that toolkit. You know, our Women in the Workplace event is like another, you know, it's very similar, I think, to Fortune and Most Powerful Women. Again, it's another community where we're really looking to extend that conversation throughout the year. So I know at least I've spent a lot of time talking about the newsmaking moments that we always think pretty deeply about, but I do think no matter what, in person or virtual or even hybrid, events really have a true community convening power beyond just the comments you might read in a story, for example.
It's a great point. So it's not just about some of the goals that we mentioned earlier. It's also about the connection, the community connection, the human connection that is fostered by these events, either in person or virtually. So it's something much more fundamental and maybe much less, you know, about the kind of journalistic utility, you know, of them in that sense.
I think they could serve multiple. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, especially when they're organized by newsroom and by news organization, there's certainly a news utility, but there's also a great reader value out of them, right? And it's either reader value to connect with the journalists, or it's reader value to connect with one another from a peer-to-peer perspective. There's, you know, the sort of like home run in all of this is when you can design an event concept that hits across the board on that. Right.
So you make news, you foster community, you have a fun kind of, you know, tense debate. You kind of get, you check the box, you know, event bingo, so to speak.
Right. And to our side colleague, you get some sponsors, you sell some tickets, and then like everybody is happy, right?
Forgot about that part. That's also very important. So I do want to get to questions here from the audience. And Claire, you mentioned this earlier, your point about diversity. And the question that we have from an anonymous attendee was, is it easier to, so alluding to Kim's point about it's easier to recruit high profile speakers because they don't have to travel, you know, the time commitments are much less than they had been previously. Does that also make it easier to get underrepresented folks or less high profile, but maybe even more interesting kind of niche experts in the door and on panels or on stage for these conferences as well? So I've maybe mangled this question a little bit. Let's start with the diversity piece, and then maybe we'll ask a follow-up. So to recap, has the virtual format made it easier to get more diverse speakers as a part of your events?
I think from my perspective, I think what is very, very important, rather than the type of formats that we use to kind of bring them to the event, whether it's in person or digital, I think what is critical is that we make a concerted effort to really, use our networks, work closely with our editorial teams, do our research to actually find either up and coming, innovative thought leaders from minorities, or, really interesting candidates, and it's like really kind of showing them the benefits of actually putting themselves up on stage, whether it's in person or digital. So I would say the effort is more based on us doing our homework and getting getting the right people on stage, rather than, I think, digital being a kind of an enabler to them speaker. And I think Kim referenced this before. If we want the person strongly enough, we'll make every effort to bring them to where they want to be, just to speak comfortably, whether in person or digitally.
So it sounds like you're at the FT, you're making an effort to get a diverse speaking roster, regardless of whether it's virtual or in person, essentially.
Yes, and I don't think necessarily being in person is not an enabler to them speaking, right? I think what I mean is we need to make the effort and the work to make sure we find the right people and bring them to the stage, be it in person or digital.
Got it. Marlene, Kim, does that jive with everything that you all are experiencing at your organizations?
I can jump in on that. I think you have to work really hard at doing this. I think like a lot of times, and I could like really dive into this, right? Like sometimes it's really hard for a woman CEO to want to say yes to something. They're more apt to say no. Do I think with certain other diverse voices, it sometimes takes a lot of work to bring them into the fold, because I think sometimes people are inclined to say no, or why does the Wall Street Journal want to feature me, right? Like I actually think sometimes there are things that we have to work through on that front. So, I think it's hard and it's important work. And I think if you were to look at the evolution of the live journalism portfolio in our newsroom, our ratios have gotten better. The way we look at diversity across the board, and I'm talking about diversity of age, gender, backgrounds, ethnicities. We're looking at it sort of across multiple filters here. It's important work. It takes hard work, and even when we get a no, we'll come back and we'll try to find a way to get it to a yes eventually.
Right. So it sounds like the virtual component maybe hasn't made this easier. It's still something that needs to be worked on and put front and center. And it's not as if this was a magical solution to enabling more diverse panels. It's still something that you need to work on.
Yeah, I mean, look at the business landscape. Look at who runs public companies. I mean, of course, then it's going to take some work now to begin to go. We're all going after the same types of CEOs and business leaders here. We have to look harder to go under the hood of these companies and understand who are those executives who aren't in the spotlight all the time, and who we can shed a little bit of light on.
It makes sense. It makes sense that Zoom wouldn't be a magical solution to all of this. So yeah, I'm glad we figured that out. In terms of one other question from the audience here, we're retracing our steps a little bit, but I do think it's worth digging into this. We spoke about in-person, the demand for in-person, but also it seems like sort of the higher bar that in-person may, that you may need to have in terms of getting people to actually get on a flight to go to Aspen or to go to New York or DC or whatever it might be. What are those kinds of things that are going to draw people in your view? And I'm paraphrasing a question from Danny DeGrave here. But Marlene, maybe we can go to you for that one.
You know, in the you know how we're always hearing now about experiences, not things. I mean, and a good conference is a great experience. There's got to be, I mean, we have, you know, people come in the night before because the morning we start the conference at 2 p.m, because that morning there's a bike ride and yoga and fly fishing and a run and stuff and you're in a beautiful place. So you have to find a way to weave in the environment, I think, wherever you are to make it good. And I think you have to have things like good food, and you have to have a really great, comfortable and interesting networking area, and know that there could be 200 people in the networking area watching a session, you know, on a screen, or they might not be in the main hall. And just, you need to, if you want it to feel like a community, you need to do those things to really make it be one, and find ways for people to meet one another, and not just, you know, it's like a high school dance, to not stay in your cliques. And I think there's lots of opportunities. I think just now people are so anxious to get together, that opportunity really exists in the coming year, as we sort of reconnect with people in a live way. Like, you can do all the breakouts and networking sessions on Zoom or on Bizzabo or on Hopin that you want. It's never going to replace meeting somebody, getting a cup of coffee. And you just have to, there's a lot you can do online. There's a lot of relationship that you can foster, but there's nothing like in person.
Makes sense. Kim, Claire, what's your point of view on this? Yeah, we're going to Claire.
I wasn't sure who was next. Okay.
No, I should probably just choose one. Yeah.
Basically, I would say I agree. I think we are going down the hybrid route, because obviously people are starting to come out like a caterpillar now, and they're like really excited to, you know, make connections again. This is very much a personal as well objective, I think, for a lot of our delegates and speakers. You know, they're meeting people, they're trying to find new ideas, new ways of thinking. What I found is, with the more senior the person is, the more they value like private, perhaps like roundtables at these events, where they can have like a nice little kind of dinner or connection, or a breakfast meeting, you know, one-on-one meetings that we can set up for them. So we always find kind of creative ways to kind of add value to why they should be there. So, you know, I think hybrid enables you to cater for both markets. You have the ones that want to do business deals, they want to meet with editorial, they want to meet with other peers. And then you have the digital for those that can't necessarily travel, or they have restrictions, but they still want to hear the thought leadership. So I think this new world, we can be creative and try and cater to every need, hopefully, as best as we can.
If I can just piggyback off of Claire's remarks. You know, I interviewed Mohammed El Arian, the president of Queen's College at Cambridge University, for our Investing for Good conference. And this kind of touches on what Marlene was saying about you want to interview people to find out how they approach things. And I asked him at this conference, what is your personal sustainability practice? What are you adopting? And he said to me, he said, I am going to be very selective on where I'm going to speak and what venues I'm going to do this at, which means I'm not going to be getting on a plane as much as I used to. So he's being very intentional. And Zoom has been a godsend in that regard. But just rethinking and reassessing how people are going to approach events is really fascinating. So to your point, JJ, I think if you do have an event, it's not just what you're going to talk about, but also the experience. You know, for instance, again, we're having our festival, our weekend festival in May. it's going to be interesting to see the types of questions people are going to want answered before they say yes to that RSVP invite.
Awesome. I know we're at time here, and I do want to respect everybody's time. But in 30 seconds or less, just to give the PR folks, their question, which I know they're looking for. What is the best way to be helpful to you all in terms of proposing speakers, that sort of thing? Is it go through the application form? Is it a bullet, 2 sentences via an email? Would love to just hear a very short, answer in terms of how they can best be helpful or, avoid being unhelpful and annoying. And then I think we can call it there. So Kim, I'm going to you first for this one.
Short email. The shorter, the better.
Super short email. How about you, Marlene?
Well, when it comes to agencies, I like to have one person at an agency and they gather all of their ideas and I get one document and I have one person at the agency to deal with until we book a speaker. Then you can turn me over to the account executive. But when I get 10 inquiries from the same agency, that doesn't really help. And also, please be familiar with the kinds of people we put on stage so that you are proposing people at that level. You've got to do your homework. All of our conference programs are online. You can look at them anytime, but please do your homework before you pitch somebody.
Great insights and advice. FT folks?
And I would say, I think it depends what they're putting forward, right? If it's an individual or a client for a partnership opportunity, I would say if it's the client, just really be clear about what their objectives are and what they would like out of this partnership with the FT, so that we are clear kind of what we can kind of suggest to them. And then also for individuals, like Marlene said, like be really clear about the individual and kind of what they can kind of speak about. And obviously at the moment, as Kim has said, diversity is really critical. Try and be creative with like really amazing like minority speakers or female speakers that can really, new and up and coming kind of thought leaders that can be put on agendas.
Awesome. Well, we will leave it there. Kim, Claire, Jennifer, Marlene, thank you all so much for giving us an hour of your time this evening. I know there are probably event things that you need to tend to, so we really appreciate it. We hope to speak with you again soon and hope you have a great night.
Thank you all.
Nice
And
to meet you
everybody in
all.
the audience,
Thank you.
thank you
Bye.
very much. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.